Everything.
I mean, exactly.
Everything causes laminitis.
We were asking about that.
Well, I think, again, that's where, I think that's where you need to consider both the metabolic trigger as well as the mechanical predisposition. And on the metabolic trigger side, you almost have to put mechanical as well, because you can get sort of a road founder where just the mechanical trauma to the laminae can cause damage and separation. But I think a lot more commonly is problems with, especially insulin-resistant horses. The horse with the giant cresty neck, that horse is at risk for laminitis, for sure. If you drive past a horse, a pony, a big horse that has a giant cresty neck, then you can count on dealing with laminitis in that horse, for sure. That's insulin resistance. It's very similar in terms of its genesis to diabetes in people, and they can track. If your waistline gets above a certain degree, you're at a really high risk of developing diabetes. If the crest gets above a certain degree, you're at risk of insulin resistance. When I was a vet in Washington State for a while, and the farmers up there said, yeah, when the crest gets hard, they're going to founder. And I thought, oh, these guys are stupid. That's ridiculous. They're right. That's right. Those guys were right. They're not stupid. It's true. If you feel the crest and it's still squishy, they're not good. But when it gets really rock solid, they're at risk. So insulin resistance is a big problem. I think it's worth mentioning that we talk a lot about Cushing's and metabolic syndrome, and a lot of people kind of talk about them as if they're the same thing, and they're not the same thing. Metabolic syndrome relates to insulin use in the body and how sugars are stored. If sugars aren't processed well, then they get to a really high level, and that's where you start to get into some trouble. Cushing's is something that happens in particularly almost every older horse will develop Cushing's disease. And that's a disease of the pituitary where they're not able to regulate certain functions very well. And the main thing is there's this feedback loop with the adrenal where the body makes its own cortisol, the body's steroid basically. And that's useful, the body uses it for different things. But it also has a feedback loop where it can say, whoa, okay, that's enough. And the pituitary will send a signal saying, shut down the factory for a bit, we're good. So what happens in horses with Cushing's is that negative feedback signal gets either turned off or slowed down. And so then horses will end up having either just high cortisol levels or it'll cycle high. So where that overlap comes in is if you have an obese horse or a horse with a big crusty neck, then if they have Cushing's, then they have more steroids circulating in the body. And horses that have insulin resistance, if you give them steroids, you make their insulin resistance worse and you can trigger laminitis.